You call it even like Black Tuesday?
Black Friday,
Black
wasn't it?
Friday or whatever it was? I never heard of that.
Weren't you there then?
No. I didn't come
That would have been like 60 or so, wasn't it? Or 67,
middle,
66,
late
67.
60s.
Whatever.
And if you, right, well, were you there yet, Roger?
No, I think it was just
Right
before I came.
you. Oh,
Yeah.
so you had to come. And then Charlie, was
Charlie-
Charlie there when you?
Charlie was rehab director when I started there,
Okay.
and then he left shortly for Faribault. Does that
I
sound
couldn't
right?
believe how.
And then from
I mean,
there to
what a
St.
cheeky
Peter.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then eventually came back to
He had
Cambridge.
everybody at
All riled up.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna tape you, but we don't plan on really showing this to anybody. It's just so if you say something we don't get it on paper.
Well, I want to see it.
Well, I can make a copy for you.
I saw that. It was just heartbreaking to see that. I thought, by God, how can a guy get away with that? I mean, what a political thing. And then you had to deal with the central office, keep him away from central office and keep his wolves at bay. I mean, that would have been a terrible thing to do. I couldn't believe that.
Well,
Roger had known all about it. I never heard of it.
Well, it was in that scrapbook.
Well, that's where I heard of it.
Yeah,
But you knew
yeah.
about it anyway.
Well,
said.
because I looked at the scrapbook.
Oh, okay.
he was well intentioned. I know that he was doing it
Well,
for the patients and for the employees. And,
Charlie always had more than a little bit of self-interest in anything he did.
And he was a.
I think that's a good observation.
well, he ran for either the state senate or state representative when he was down in Faribault.
We ran for Congress in that second district down there.
Well, maybe that was it. Yeah.
Because and when he was up here, didn't he, wasn't he like the mayor of,
Lexington.
Right. Lexington.
yeah, Lexington or something
Yeah,
like that
yeah.
down there?
And he,
I heard he was back in St. Peter area nowadays. I don't know if that's true or not.
well, we saw him about
Boy,
6-7 years
Yeah.
ago.
I heard he sold his place outside of Faribault.
we were there. That was quite
Well,
a
no,
spread.
I heard that, I never was there.
What's that?
Where he
Charlie's-
lived.
Charlie's
Well,
place.
Marlene, his wife, was in
Mhm.
real estate, and somebody lost the place,
Oh.
and she picked it
Oh, is that
up.
how that
Yeah.
happened?
Uh-huh.
Didn't it have like a pool house or
Oh,
something?
yes, it had a guest house and a pool, and then the lake was right there, and there was a loft in the main house. The kids had the loft, and
Was it like a modern type house or?
yeah, pretty much. Uh-huh.
Charlie was power hungry. And I remember he had his office right across the hall from me on the second floor of administration. And man, I tell you, he made me so uncomfortable at times because I knew he didn't give a damn what he said or what he did, as long as it was for the patients and for the employees and for Charlie. And he wanted to make a name for himself because he wanted to go up the ladder. Well, he finally ended up mouthing off too much to the press when they put him in charge of the soldiers' home or something.
Oh, yeah.
Remember?
Oh, was he? Yeah.
Yeah, didn't he and Larry McHugh both?
Yes,
there?
I think you're right. I forgot he went there.
And
They all lost their jobs eventually.
yeah. Well, Turnbull just went to the press or went public with his feelings about the way the funding was coming in for the soldiers' home and the support he wasn't getting from, St. Paul and
That's a tough thing because that thing is run by that Veterans Board, and you don't screw around with that board. There's no end running with that board. There's been plenty of heads rolled because people at the home went outside. That didn't go through the channels back there. It's still happening.
yeah. Well, anyway,
Let's start at the beginning here, John.
okay.
When did you start at the state hospital?
September of 1961.
Now, do you remember your first tour there, and what were your impressions?
I don't remember a tour, but A lot of this is kind of vague, Roger, but
That's a few years ago.
yeah.
Well, you came up from an actual hospital in Twin Cities, right?
Yeah, Midway Hospital.
Yeah.
And I, interviewed with Dave Vale and I interviewed Bob Hoffman in Fergus and Les Johnson at Wilmer and Harold Peterson at Brainerd. I went around and talked to them to get an idea what was it like to be an administrator for the state. And they gave me their opinions. And
You ignored them and went to work.
no, I finally, the pay was so much better than what I was getting at Midway. With all the, they gave me a free rent-free house on the grounds. And there were some other things that I just couldn't resist that I wasn't getting from the Baptist Hospital Fund in St. Paul that ran Midway and Mounds Park hospitals.
When you were in school and when you went to work, did you ever foresee you'd end up working in a public institution?
No,
It was more the general hospital kind
Yeah,
of work
right.
you envisioned
Yeah.
for yourself.
I did my residency at Methodist Hospital in Rochester and at Mayo Clinic, and spent after I graduated in June. I spent a couple months there working, and then I came back up to Northwestern Hospital where I got my start in hospital field. And then from there I went over to Midway, and I don't regret anything I did. I mean, I've got a few things to show for it.
Florence.
Well, it was a wonderful place to have a family.
I bet. Did you have any kids when you came up, moved
No,
up?
no. Our daughter
take
was
long,
born a couple of months after we got here, though.
And you lived right on campus for a while.
Yeah,
Which of the houses was
the
yours?
middle one.
Okay. Who had lived in that house before you, do you remember?
Oh, the doctor who died in the house. I can't remember his name though. But people would remind me of that quite often.
Adkins?
No, no,
No.
Oh.
Oh, it's an odd name.
I can't remember what his name.
Not, it wasn't Booty or it wasn't.
No,
Mm-mm.
and Booty and Adkins lived at the end of Delwood.
Yeah, and the new
Oh,
house.
okay.
They were already
They
there
were-
then, those two new
Oh,
houses?
yes. Mhm. And
Okay.
Dr. Lee lived
Yep.
to the south of
Yep.
us.
Fern Lee,
Yeah,
and
and Henry, her husband,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
he was a physician, right?
Yes.
yeah.
I knew their kids.
Yeah.
They rode on the school bus. Went,
Well, the school bus
Yeah.
made a run.
Yeah.
Well, at any rate, we moved on campus in the fall of '61, and we wanted to have our own house, of course, and so we started looking at property on Paul's Lake
yeah,
across,
right across
you know,
from us.
yeah. And we bought the property and we built.
What year did you build that house?
64, I think.
So you were on grounds for what, better than 2 years then probably?
Yeah.
Pretty close to 3 years.
Was that an inconvenience in any way?
The only thing that urged us to move off, one of the things that was the fact that when our children are outside, or at least one of them, Terry Lynn, the residents would come over and start to
They were
monkey around.
they were always around.
Sure,
Mhm.
sure. I'm sure kids were an unusual thing for
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
them to see,
Kind of
so,
unique.
sure.
It was.
But when you, so in your era, the buildings were all as they were finally with the, well, Delwood's must have been
Delwood
built
was
while you were there, right?
67.
Yeah. But everything else had already been done. Everything was already in place, right?
Um,
Well, was the laundry built? That was
That was before.
Well,
just before then.
It must
have
have
been a pretty new
late
building.
50s maybe?
Yeah, I was gonna say around 60. I think.
Because my grandpa was still working there, and I remember him talking about that. New.
but it was,
That was right at the peak of the population there too. Then, so there were over 2,000.
2045 when I got there. And I tell you, it was, for me, coming from a general hospital, to walk through those, the second floor of 2, 3, 4, 5, with the bunks that close together,
Yeah.
50, I don't know if it was 50 patients to one side and 50 patients on the other,
I think so.
or 40, and it was depressing. And it got to the point where I had to start taking, after I was administrator, I had to start taking visitors around. And I think that's what really worked up a lot of political support to do something for, and I think Faribault was worse off than us at that time.
Oh,
I think that's right.
I think from the condition of the buildings, the age of some of those buildings. I mean, goodness, in those days, those old porch things were still there in the middle of campus that looked like the old asylum days. They were very distinctive, interesting buildings, but they had to have been pretty non-functional by that time.
Yeah.
And huge.
Boswell and McBroom were the newest, and but they had the physically handicapped, and 8 and 9 had some characters in there, some, I don't want to say patients. I mean, we called them patients then, but they what?
When you came, had it already ended, or were you administrators having to do your own legislative presentations?
No.
Was that over by that time, or were
No,
you still having to do that?
I had to make at least 3 or 4 legislative presentations, along with the medical director. Dr. Atkins wasn't somebody that was a forceful individual. And so I had to convince the legislators that there were
Needs.
big time needs. And
How did you think that you got treated when you made your presentation to
fairly
legislators?
well.
Pretty well in those
Yeah,
days?
I thought the legislators were fairly,
Did they come up and tour?
they did, but then,
Elmer Anderson did too one time.
yeah,
When he was governor?
yeah. Getting to Rogers, the, well, the certain legislative groups would come up and tour, but then you always had an annual or biannual, I can't remember, visit by the building commission. And this was a time that you really had to shine, to show them how badly needed you to have improvements to the physical plant, if not new buildings. Well, hell, new buildings were out of the question. But I've got books. It was tough. Let me tell you, it was tough. I had my heart attack in 1971, probably at the peak of legislative I know they were thinking about cutting us back, and it put a lot of pressure on me.
Who
And-
already thought there weren't enough resources, and then as I recall in reading some of the articles, they talked about the need for further cuts
Yep.
at a time when most hospital professionals would have been saying we need more. I mean, it's just unconscionable to think of anything less.
That's why you would think if they came up and toured and saw those beds
Yeah,
like
that close
you'd
together.
think they would just say, yeah, what
Yeah.
do you need? But it doesn't seem to work that way, does
It
it?
never did work that way. With too
People
many
don't relate
competing.
to that lesser folks.
Yeah. And I think Minnesota's always had a pretty good view of treatment
Yeah,
and what ought to be done. But I think that's also balanced by fairly as conservative as can be within
Yes.
that framework
Yeah.
spending ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You all subscribe to making things better for everyone, yourselves included in state policy. But when it comes right down to it, the spending stuff is still we're conservative by nature, I think, and it holds back.
now when you started, you were the administrator and there was a medical director. So any physical plant or hiring and stuff fell to you, and then anything medical or related to the patients
Right.
fell to the medical director.
Yeah. Athens was not a, what word do I want to use? I loved him like a brother. I mean, he and I got along just fine. But he was not one to get up and,
Yeah.
Assertive, for lack
Yeah,
of a better
that's a
word.
good
yeah, right. With the legislators and with the staff.
Was that? I mean, officially, when you had a medical director and an administrators, were you in fact equal, or were you one above?
Was one more equal than the other?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
I
good way
think
to
the
put it.
medical director certainly had more power and authority than the administrator.
Oh, was that right? In those days?
Well, it was a medical model, right?
Well, the
I'm sure that was-
legislators put into law back in the late 50s or early 60s that the state institutions or state hospitals would not be managed or run by a medical doctor or a medical superintendent. And they wanted a licensed, qualified, trained administrator to, be in charge of the hospitals as they were known then. But Dr. Vail died then in 71,
Yeah, I think so.
and he was the real go-getter.
I think you don't hear so much now just because of the generational changes in people working, but I remember, up until recent times, before I retired in 2004, I mean, his name was like one of the saints. If you invoke Dr. Vail's name, there were still people
Yeah.
around that remembered that as, if not the good old days, certainly good times for people to be in the field and wanting to do good.
He alienated because he's the one that took the law and pushed it, with administrators and medical. And he really alienated the Minnesota Psychiatric Association. But he didn't give a damn. I mean, nothing bothered him. He did what he felt was right. And he was against institutionalization. And he wanted to deinstitutionalize many of the patients and the residents.
When your time, was there any real thought, or maybe it was impossible because of the population, but was there any closure threats that you had to deal with while you were administrator?
No.
Nothing perhaps
Howard
serious.
Ching
You still
was-
had the population was too high, I suppose.
Yeah,
Be
where would they-
realistic.
Where would they put everyone?
Yeah.
I know by the time I came in '70, though, it was, you know, openly talked about and quite often.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, now the regionalization kind of was right at that time too,
Yeah.
where Cambridge really shrank because St. Peter opened an MR unit and
Wilmer.
Wilmer.
Brainerd.
Brainerd,
You see, we were sent,
Hastings.
and Moose Lake opened
Moose.
up a big unit for the retarded, and Brainerd was opening up buildings for the retarded, and so our population was dropping.
Plus, we didn't do mental health here,
No,
Right, we were a
which-
single purpose.
which in those days was kind of thought to be in some ways, the business of the business
Yeah,
was
yeah.
mental
That's a big
health. It would
thing.
always be there.
Yeah.
Tell that to some of these places nowadays.
But yet the people that were left were some of the really difficult to care for,
boy, you better believe it.
and that's
They were.
yeah.
Yeah.
So then in 73 or 72, when the class action suit action started, you were one of the prime focuses of that, I imagine.
Yeah. That really put me in a tough spot.
They wanted you to be the company man, I suppose, and give the
That's
company
right.
line.
That's a huge thing. I always thought you're one thing to the policy people in St. Paul, but you're there alone speaking to your staff when you get back here.
Where
And
reality
they're two
is.
different.
Yeah.
They're two different interest groups for one thing.
Well, I had to get up on the jury on the stand and tell the judge. This was not by jury; it was by Judge
Right.
Larson, Judge Larson,
Yes.
and tell him that we get our money every 2 years, and these are the problems we have that we can't do with the money, but the money was still coming in, and of course the parents, this one guy in Anoka, I can't think of his name, who started the class
Oh,
action.
Welch?
Oh, Dick
Yeah.
Welch.
Welch.
Richard Welch, yeah.
And they were saying, behind their backs, they're saying Stocking doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's a BSer, but I had to tell like it was. I mean, I had to tell the truth, and there was some of my central office people witnessing the whole thing. I had to work with the Attorney General's officer for 4 or 5 months prior to the trial. I remember going down to his house in,
Is that Fable?
huh?
Fable? Or was that someone else?
No, I don't think it was Fable. He was a little bit above this guy.
Okay.
But this guy did the legwork for whoever the Attorney General was. And and their job was to defend
Yep.
the state.
Make him look good.
And I remember going down to his house in a neighborhood, this rich neighborhood right off Hennepin Avenue near the Guthrie Theater. Right? Anyway, we went to his house and he and I and a couple others sat there and drank martinis for about 3 hours.
Got your strategy down.
That's right.
That's a hard life.
I'll tell that. What was it? Was there a strategy or an idea how to counter that lawsuit on the part of DPW in those days?
Well, that's why Charlie was brought in, right?
At the end,
To-
yeah,
to
before it went to trial.
create programs and to show that, yeah, Cambridge is providing programs 6
yeah.
hours a day, 5 days a week through the structured program services, which was mine.
Yeah, you're right, to a certain degree, but Charlie overdid it. And I don't think that pacified the plaintiffs at all, or Welch. And
Well, it didn't, no, and it shouldn't have either, I mean, that's,
but there a lot of legislators were really ticked off with Judge Larson's ruling. We can't have
a federal,
was he a
Federal judge.
federal
it was federal.
federal judge come in here and tell us,
Tell the states how to spend their money.
yep,
Yeah, I think, you know, the state said, we don't disagree, you know, we'll do it as we can. We'll do the right thing as we're able
Yeah.
to.
Yeah,
But if you have a federal court telling you, and not only will we do that, you'll do it according to this time period, that did irritate plenty. You know, plus the class action nature of it probably didn't help either, because it was considerably
well, the
more
plaintiffs
far-reaching
won.
than that.
yeah,
Look what happened. Unbelievable. I can't remember the plaintiff's lawyers. I have their names somewhere.
well, Luther Grandquist,
Yeah,
of
Luther.
course, is
Granquist,
the big
yeah.
one.
And his assistant. And I worked so closely with those people, and pretty much on their on their side.
Yeah.
But and I think DPW knew that I was going to side with the plaintiffs.
Well, I think
The
they
hell?
also had to know that at that time, I don't remember how many states had already lost them.
Yes,
What, 3 only or 4, I think, by the time that Judge Larson made it determined, but plenty more after that. I mean, it wasn't like it was
no,
a landmark decision in the context
No.
of what was going on, or, you know, for right to treatment around the country. You know, in every case it was found there was a constitutional right to treatment. So I don't think there could be too much
so then what happened?
irritation of
John?
Larson by
Because
himself.
the court case got settled and you left, so how did, what was the process
Well,
of that?
They had to have 3 or 4 administrators at Anoka over a period of about 5 years. And they wanted a hospital administrator down there because it was a medical model. And so they asked, well, they didn't ask me, they told me, you're going to go down to Anoka and be an administrator. And your medical director will be, he was a character, Greenfield, I think his name was. He was about 75, 80 years old, and used to, I'd go, his office is right across the hall from mine on the second floor there. And I oftentimes would walk by, and he'd have his feet up in the desk reading the Time magazine, or, you know, I mean, he just was not a good medical director. So I got down there, and we managed to get things done, but then we had, well, let me go back a little bit. Before I came down there, there was at least 3 or 4 administrators. I mean, that hospital had the biggest turnover of any state hospital as far as administrators, and to a lesser degree, medical directors. But in 74 and then 75, things went okay. We started planning for the chemical dependency unit, and then in 76, all hell broke loose because we had a patient. We had in the intensive care unit, the place where we put patients who are really psychotic and they're acting out badly. He found a set of keys, got out, and went and murdered a next door neighbor,
Right in Anoka.
right next to the grounds. And I'll tell you, I didn't hear the end of that for a year and a half. And of course, you know, these assholes in St. Paul wanna blame the administrator or the people in command. No security.
Yeah, let's see your rules and regulations for handling of keys, but I can just hear it all.
I can show you a lot of stuff that I've got upstairs on, they built this damn fence around the building and, it was bad for a long time.
Now, what was the rationale at Cambridge for moving you? Was that when the chief executive officer concept was coming in, where there'd be one person in charge of the whole facility?
Yeah, they wanted to replace me with somebody who was not a hospital administrator, but somebody who was a administrator in
program.
Program background.
so they got whatchamacallit,
Dave?
Fergus.
And I think
Bill
that was I remember the press announcement, not the actual legislation, that came later, but the announcement was that the DD specific facility, Maynard or Cambridge and Faribault would have, you know, no doubt in relation to the lawsuit, you know, their go-to person, the old man, would be a program person to show how serious the department was about making those changes. And
Yeah.
then there are a couple other categories, though, in the rest of the system. In some cases, for a time, I don't know if it ever happened, but for a time, the medical director at a couple, in the original version, were going to be CEOs, and then you had hospital administrators at other places. Now, I don't remember if that actually came true in terms of the medical directors for a couple spots. I don't remember even what those would have been. But there were three categories. Maybe it had to do with multi-purpose campuses or something.
I don't know who Dale's medical director was, but, you know, he didn't last long either. I mean, he got the boot.
Well, it was Ristic, wasn't it, to start? Wasn't
Well, you had Ristich.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And when Dale came, was
wasn't Dobler yet, was
Dr.
it?
Dubler there yet?
Was it? No, I don't think he was there
Glydas.
quite yet. Glydas must have been an actor. Yeah,
Mhm.
I'll bet you she was.
And Linus was a very close friend of mine.
And then Dr. Dobler after that, I bet.
Yeah.
Dr. who?
Dobler.
From Princeton. He lived in Princeton. I think he worked in St. Cloud and someplace else up north. Vets stuff a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, he went back there, I think, when he left here. The Vets Hospital.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, Dale got the boot because there were so many complaints going to St. Paul about abuse. And so he was replaced by
A team.
who?
A team.
Friends of yours. Thanks, John.
This guy from Ohio,
Well,
Wow.
eventually Gossett.
Gossett.
Yeah.
But in between,
Oh, man.
Jonathan,
Jonathan Balk,
Oh, yeah.
Larry
Bill-
Soffer,
Bill Soffer.
Larry McHugo, man,
Rosenthal. That's the four, right?
Rosenthal, yeah. Oh, no, and Dennis.
And Dennis Boland.
Oh, how could we forget?
God, what a mess that was. I know that
I still can't feature that when I think about it. I still
That they
can't.
brought in a team? You mean?
Well, I just can't remember
Well,
how.
who was the head person?
Well,
Jonathan.
Jonathan Balk.
Did he make himself the head person, or
I
was
think they told him, you are the one in charge and this is your management team, go in and fix it.
Because they were even looking at creating a multi-facility CEO
Well,
job
there was,
for him.
yeah, he was. He was multi-institution CEO, because he had Anoka and Cambridge for a while. Created especially for him.
whenever I mention the
Jonathan
Jonathan
she just
Balk,
goes
the
into shock,
Yvonne
doesn't she? that she gets post-traumatic stress syndrome, literally.
Yeah.
She, I mean,
Oh, God, she hated him.
oh, well, you know, and he was tough on her. He really was.
Was he tougher on her than on you think?
I don't know. You know,
Or you both?
well, it was. Well, I think
I'd
maybe.
agree. Maybe a little more because she had the 24 hours a day to worry
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
I
she
suppose.
did. Well, and then she had that meeting where she made the comment.
On the refrigerator?
On the, yeah.
What was that?
Well, I think one of the unit directors had located a used refrigerator someplace at a certain price, and Yvonne suggested.
Jonathan was there.
Jonathan was at this meeting, and Yvonne innocently said, "Well, couldn't you do him down a little bit on the price for this refrigerator?" Well,
Oh my!
oof,
He laid into her right in front of.
right in front of all the
Was
unit
that
directors.
right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I wasn't there.
I think I
but
heard this before.
I was there. I don't know how many times she had it right on the board after that.
But,
I mean, knowing Yvonne, it surely
Oh, it was
meant
totally
nothing.
And you know, my wife
Less than nothing.
has said the same thing after that, and I said, you know, I mean, I was really sensitive to it after this.
After
You
that,
really
I
shouldn't say
wouldn't
that.
have been
No.
before,
No,
but maybe maybe we should have been.
well, yeah,
Certainly,
Yeah.
we would have been after that.
but you're right, Yvonne. She just cringes when she hears his name. It's awful.
yeah, every time I see her, which isn't very often, but I'll go up and say, Jonathan, Jonathan wants me to give you a little kiss on the cheek. she just cringes.
Well, I think it's worth remembering too that at that time, Dale didn't. I mean, he was moved down the pike to Faribault. He
Did
was
he go to
moved
Faribault?
out. He was a program evaluator or something.
Yeah,
I think
he
they
was
called
kicked-
it.
kicked
But he
out.
didn't lose his job as such.
No.
He got a different job, but he stayed in the system, and I think it would be hard to say. I think Jonathan had to show something was being done. It was okay, if you will, that Dale stayed in the system down there. Whatever his judged failings were, they weren't to the point where he needed to be out the door. He was moved down there. You know how that works. People get moved around.
Yeah.
But Jonathan had to do something when he gets here, and I think, clearly he had to deal with existing managers to effect change that he could portray to others as making it better.
Examples.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, better and as examples. You're right. But that was,
That was an awful period for us
Well,
being there.
when Bob came down to Anoka, if you mentioned the name
Gossip.
Gossip, Bob was a very laid back,
Oh,
I never heard a swear word come out of his mouth. But you mentioned Gossip, and his face would start to get red. He just, somehow, he just could not stand Gossip, and Gossip apparently got involved with our buddy that lives up here, who works in central office,
Tessner.
Esther.
Tessner, and his divorce, I think. And I don't know how Gossip got into that, but fact
Well,
is,
Tessner's from Ohio too, I mean, they
Oh,
came
really?
up as a team.
Yeah.
oh, I
Oh,
didn't
yes.
know that.
Ken brought him
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Oh, well, anyway,
Oh, sure. Good.
uh, Bob
Thank you.
was so upset with Gossett, he just wouldn't even talk about him.
Yeah.
Well, that was Bob's philosophy. That was his moral values. He just. But
Excellent.
yeah, of course, Gossett got the boot, and then
Well, Bob had he was a veteran of the system, like you were,
boy,
and
was
And
he,
a real company man.
Yeah.
He really was.
and here's the way that things work, and here's how the way things are done, and they may be not perfect or how they do it in in the private sector, but this is how it works in here, and it served the system such as it was pretty well, and also not just the department, but all of state government has to act a certain way in responses to how business is conducted, and I think in Ken's case and certainly in plenty of others that I've worked with over time is people think, well, that doesn't make any sense. We need to fix it or change it. That's more sensitive, to what our needs are. Just because we've always done it that way doesn't need, and I've heard that. I can't tell you how many times the people. But most of us that have worked in the system for a long time,
There's a culture.
there's a culture, and maybe it's too comfortable, or you should look for new ways of doing
Yeah,
things.
but it works. Or
But the
at least-
veterans that were in it a long time, you're not inclined to, to change, or you have a pretty good rock solid belief in why things need to be as they are. But I tell you, a new person, especially a program person, and coming from the outside, says this is crazy how we have to go about this stuff. Example might be the first waiver homes that were, well, that's crazy that we got to do
Yeah,
it this way
yeah.
or that way. But for a veteran, long-term guy like Bob, those folks would be an anathema. I mean, it would be crazy for anybody to think otherwise, and
Well,
I think to be
think-
viewed as not
And I
quite
think Bob
ethical.
was a nice guy, and gossip would cut your throat if you really thought it would move him along.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
I asked Norbert who the best person he ever worked for was, and he said Bob Rosenthal. He said he was just
Yeah.
the nicest guy and level-headed, and
Mhm.
so I thought that was quite a compliment.
Yeah. Bob and I worked together for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years down in Anoka. And of course, I've known him when he was at Rochester and at Moose Lake and at Central Office. I didn't know him personally, but I just knew him. We knew each other fairly well. And he was just a outstanding character.
Yeah, I think Yvonne and I enjoyed our working for him during that period more than anyone else, because he was level-headed, and you could talk to him, and he wouldn't lose his temper, and
Yeah,
he'd try to work with you.
except when he talked about gases.
Well,
I think he had the
Yeah, I could-
advantage too of, the abuse that did occur. The celebrated abuse cases.
the Delwood incident.
I think Bob also had he was savvy and learned and wise enough to understand that, that obviously cannot be condoned, but that things don't go right, and that they can be made better, and that's kind of our obligation too. And you need to deal with what happened, but you can also deal with ways that are better going forward. And I think he had seen that in the system in response to other crises that had happened. He had a longer view of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't everybody cut off their heads and jump
Yeah,
in
something may
the
take
river.
time, but it'll.
Right. I mean, he was a steadying, long view guy, which was very helpful, like you say, when he came up there. But that was not the mentality of some of the others
No.
that came at the time. It was
No.
a slash and burn, I think.
Oh, yes.
It was
Oh,
pretty
yes.
obvious.
Well, getting back Cambridge, I left in spring of '74, but by the spring of '72, we were transferring patients, mostly up to Brainerd and into Moose Lake, and that's what really brought our population down.
Yeah, I think it was, what do you think, about 72? It probably was in 800 or so?
Yeah. Well, when I left,
Yeah, I would guess.
when I left in spring of '74, I think that the population was down to around 900.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
13 years, you managed to lose 100 patients a year on average during your reign there.
You lost over 1,000 in your
All by
tenure.
yourself, John.
But that was a real logistical headache,
Yes.
transferring
Mhm.
patients
Yeah.
from Cambridge up to Brainerd
Yep.
and Cambridge to Moose Lake. Well, I don't have to tell you, I mean, and I can't remember any major incidents that occurred during that time.
No, I think it went pretty smooth. When
Yeah.
you consider how many people moved.
Oh yeah, I wonder, was the majority of that population decline attributable to that? Is that what you're saying, John? The
The
reduction,
the regionalization.
the regionalization. That was the major portion of the.
Yeah,
And I suppose there are diversions of admissions going on around that time too. But I mean, that would have been is a pretty good because that regionalization, those moves didn't occur over the period of your time. It was at the end of that time. You know, in a more compressed period of time. That really is a lot of movement on both ends when you think about it. I think there was a lot of work that was done in terms of trying to make things work out.
Now the advent of medication for epilepsy must have
Oh,
also had an
yeah.
impact on some of those
They-
early years.
right, it did. And when I arrived there in 62 or 61, it, a good, I wanna put a percentage on it, but a good portion of our patients were epileptic. They were there for epilepsy
Right.
and not for retardation. And that's a crime, you know, to me, that's a crime. But, with the new medications that are coming out in the market, boy, they were able to cut that epilepsy down.
Did they have parent groups or parent associations or groups of
Yeah.
parents that would meet with you on occasion, or how did that work? I guess what I'm really saying is, did those folks that were active in the lawsuit, Welch's, Timeson's et al., were they part of a larger group of patients or of families, or were they a smaller set that worked real hard, you know, towards the changes that they thought needed to happen?
I think they were a smaller set,
Okay.
but the group that we had to deal with most closely was Ramsey County,
ARC.
ARC. And Anoka, you know, except for Welch, I mean, they weren't anywhere near as active. Of course, most of our patients were, Faribault was taking Hennepin,
Yep.
and we were taking Anoka and
And Ramsey.
Ramsey. And then we would take northeastern Minnesota.
Oh,
Oh,
right.
that big
Yeah,
area.
right.
Yeah, there was a big receiving area.
I forgot that because of the absence of Moose and Brainerd having.
And central
People.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
And then Brainerd started picking them up, and then we transferred patients who lived in Little Falls area, or, you know, that type of. And
I was a social worker in those days when that was happening, but what I was surprised about was how many people we had from Stearns County, and I think that was sort of
and Cambridge.
it just took so long to finish that move to Brainerd because there were so many folks that were Stearns County. When that became assigned to Stearns was assigned to Brainerd instead of us, that must have been a big number. Well, we won't say any
That's-
more about
yeah.
Stearns.
I was gonna say, wasn't there a
There's
study done
reasons
on
for that, yeah.
Well,
So now, what do you remember about this Black Friday that we talked about earlier?
well, there were rumblings. You know, I'd get feedback from various staff, and they'd say, "Well, there's going to be a confrontation I can't remember, I don't think I brought Dr. Vale up for that. I just don't remember. Well, anyway,
And it was about staffing, right? Staffing numbers?
Yep.
That was the crux of the whole
yeah, yeah.
thing.
And Charlie was gonna make sure that central office and the legislators provided us with more staff. Uh, Didn't I put some of that stuff in the,
Yeah, I think there was a note in there, and I was trying to think, but did they literally threaten to resign? Was that the idea? It was gonna be a mass
Some,
resignation?
supposedly.
Charlie had a few shills, and they would get up and say, well, we're all gonna resign, or I'm gonna resign. And I was supposed to be impressed and panic and
Now, where was this meeting held?
in the auditorium,
It was in the auditorium.
yeah.
Any idea how many people were there?
It wasn't plumb full, I mean, it was, we had a number of chairs set up, but, you know, Charlie did his damnedest to work up as many participants and
What a
Was
guy.
was his angle staff at all levels, which I think from reading the materials it was, but was his support more from like professionals and
no, it was for the
a direct care?
rank of.
He had those whipped up to that same degree?
Oh, yeah.
I would have thought that might have been a little hard in
Yeah.
those days.
Yeah. Although they had terrific ratios, I mean, they needed more staff. I
Right.
mean, it was hard to argue against it. You could argue his approach to getting it.
Well, when you have, if I recall, there was a point in time in the middle '60s or late '60s that you would have 100 residents to a cottage. And during the night,
One
one
person
employee.
for the building.
Yep.
And just think if there would have been a fire.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been catastrophic. It would be,
Well, and as you said, those older two-story buildings, those 100 weren't exactly dispersed. That would allow for good movement. I mean, they're all cheek by jowl. You never would have got 10 feet if a
Yeah.
disaster had
oh,
happened.
and some of the
up there.
buildings, they were tied in bed. I remember that.
Yeah.
So they'd stay in bed.
Ambulant people?
Ambulant people, yeah. Cottage 7. I remember that when I came, there were straps on every bed, so that they would stay in bed once they were put
Boy,
there.
I knew that. I forgot that.
To me, Cottage 5 had some of the worst, if I recall.
That would have been adult men, severely retarded. I
Yeah.
think is my recollection. 7 was younger, severely and profoundly retarded.
God.
How about staffing for the rest of the hospital? Not patient care. How was that in terms of sufficiency? Would you think? You know, those people that prepared the food and cut the grass and kept the boiler going. Was that a particular issue back in those days, or?
Well, I think engineering and maintenance were doing okay. Dietary, I never heard, you know, from Maureen Whalen, you never heard many complaints.
Nurses,
Anderson, what was your first
Harriet.
Harriet.
Harriet Anderson. Oh,
Didn't
she would complain,
Yeah.
but she wouldn't.
Yvonne said something that I was kind of surprised at when you talked to her a couple months ago now. And it was about the numbers of RNs. You remember what that was? I guess maybe I'm more attuned to the more recent,
Yeah, I think she felt
Shortages
there
that
were
need- enough.
enough.
yeah.
Yeah. She was in charge of shots for a number of
Yeah.
years.
But then I suppose you could say that maybe in terms of actual registered nurses, there never was, or, except for, immunizations and that, there really isn't a great need for great numbers as opposed to mental health programs, where, you know, the psychiatrist's
Right,
handmaidens for the most part.
Well, this, you know, this,
So maybe I shouldn't have been so
let's
surprised.
face it, that, the kind of work that we would offer was not uh, particularly attractive to RNs.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the salary was in
Yeah,
comparison.
Yvonne
That's
seemed
what
to
Yvonne-
think the RN pay
Yeah.
was,
It might not have been a typical nurse's job, but the pay
was good.
was good, yeah. At least I
May-
was.
Maybe using your example of, you know, the pay in this job was maybe higher than it might have been on the private side. How about the, you know, when you moved up here to the community and you worked at the facility, what was your belief about the acceptance of the institution by the community in general, Cambridge specifically? Did you have any particular opinion formed around that?
No, I joined the Lions Club, and I can't remember of any other organizations that I got active in. But I wasn't looked down upon, I don't think, by community leaders. In fact,
We were working on ambulance things and
yeah,
whatnot
I started
together.
the ambulance service.
There was a sense, well, by gossip for sure, and one that I wouldn't necessarily have disagreed with, and that was, at least towards the end, the facility kind of existed quite a bit separately from the community in terms of interactions with, understanding on of the public's part what exactly the colony was or did now. Was it going to close was the main fear, but that there wasn't a lot of, you know, some of us had different tentacles, I suppose, that were involved, but it was
Yeah.
felt that there was and I think this was in some of the hospital studies too, after your tenure, that, you know, the relationship between the facility and the community couldn't be characterized as bad, it just didn't exist. But in your time, that maybe wasn't quite that way from what you're saying.
Don't you think there was kind of a fear, though, of by the public of the institution?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of what was there?
I'd get calls every now and then about a patient walking down the street, or and citizen would call up and said, "I'm going to get that kid or that guy if he walks by my house." You know, there were actual threats. I remember one incident. I don't know if both of you were there or not, but we had a resident from Cottage 5 or 3, I don't know, came over to the administration building and took the switchboard operator hostage.
We read about that
Mm-hmm.
in one of the
Put
articles.
a pen, a ballpoint
Yeah.
pen to her neck, and threatened to kill her. And so I obviously was called, and I got Sheriff Lauren Erickson, and he and I set up we kind of knew which way they were gonna go. He was going down Dalwood, then he was gonna take a right and go into town. And Lauren and I hid behind a garage, and when they walked by, we went out and got them.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Really?
Jeez.
And I don't know how much publicity that got in the local newspapers, but she was scared.
She was traumatized, literally, wasn't
Yeah,
she? I think
yeah.
she missed a lot of work, as I recall.
Yeah. I wish I could. I don't know if there's anything in the material that I gave you or not, but
Yeah, there was on that, not the outcome so much, or long range, or, you know, what happened afterwards. but it sounded pretty spooky from
Yeah.
the news accounting of it. You know, there were, you know, John Bickleen had talked with Roger some back. He had some interesting stories.
Yeah, about the murder in Cottage 5.
Yeah,
That was before your time.
kind of variations on some themes that, you know, it was, you know, we may not been a mental health facility, but
We had some
we
mental
certainly
illness
dealt
problems.
with some real bad and high functioning behaviors.
Yeah. Well, you know, it was difficult to deal with this because of the staffing problems. And
Now, I gotta ask you though, now you're hiding behind this garage. What happened? I mean, did he still have the pen to her neck or were they just walking
yeah,
along?
We picked a street that we thought he'd come down at random. And so and I don't know if we had any other deputies out waiting for him. But I mean, one deputy could have subdued the kid, but you didn't want to scare him.
Yeah.
You'd shove that
Yeah.
ballpoint into her neck. But I can't remember if we just talked him out of it or if we went and wrestled him. But everything turned out okay as far as she was concerned. But there were any number of times that I would go up and down the river
Oh yeah,
looking for
searches.
I think on a couple occasions when I was called back to work and because there was a patient missing, and boy, I tell you that would.
Intensive searches, I remember a number
Yeah.
of those.
Yep.
And I remember finding on a cold winter day at least one body down toward the river on the south. Was it? Well, anyway, I remember on 2 occasions I found bodies. And the thing is that when you get a call that there's a patient missing, then you have to ask why. What did the staff do wrong to allow a patient to walk out of the building? And correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't the buildings always locked after a certain? Some were locked all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think even the highest functioning buildings, you had a regular curfew. I think it was mostly dark.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. 8 o'clock or something
yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Well, they were
Dark.
locked. They weren't open.
When I got there in '61, you know, the women were on the north side and
Men
the
on the
men
south.
were on the south side. And then we integrated.
Were there any physical barriers set up yet at that time? Because I think there was literally a fence at one time, wasn't there?
I
At
don't,
least in the tunnel, I know there was a slide across where they could literally shut off the tunnel from north.
I don't
to
remember an
south.
outside one.
no, I don't
Maybe
think
there
there
wasn't.
was.
Maybe I'm thinking of the tunnel.
Well, yeah, maybe there was. I don't remember that in the tunnel.
What were when you came? Ask Me was the union already. What was that? Did Ask Me exist in 1961 when you came?
I don't know.
As a-
I
well,
never
certainly
had
as a
much to
force.
do
No,
with the union.
Yeah.
They were.
You had your personnel people buy them off every time, huh?
Yeah.
I don't think they were active at all.
No.
And they were there,
Right.
but I think it was almost more of a social.
Well, for many years outside the dining room, there was an old charter from the union, and I'd love to know what that date was now. I used to see it and look
Well,
at it quite often.
Wasn't there something in that scrapbook that didn't you take that as my
Yeah, I've got that. I don't think that's in there.
Okay.
unless I overlooked it. I don't think, I looked at that thing. It was a full-blown fancy colored
Oh,
charter
okay.
by the,
Calligraphy type.
by a body other than the state asked me. It was something bigger, like a charter or something. And Alex Shields' name was on that one. It was from the 50s, I'm thinking.
Alex Shield. Jeez.
But you know, the other thing is, you know, there wasn't a. I mean, the contract was what, 3 pages long,
Yeah,
and wasn't
yeah.
collectively bargained.
No, 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 it was very basic.
So, I mean, I could see where you wouldn't have the same level of activity because of it. In your era, the union was asked me specifically wasn't a
Not
real
in
force.
Cambridge, but down in Anoka, they were pretty active.
Well,
Confrontational.
and that was right around the time that they were getting that way in Cambridge too,
70s.
in the 70s.
Yeah, middle
Yeah.
70s. And then you had the different, well, the law changed right then too, so you had people competing for
Yep.
employee groups
Yep.
to represent them.
Have you driven through the state hospital grounds recently, and what do you feel?
Oh, that's a hard question. In a way, there is some sadness, you know, but it obviously brings back memories, a lot of memories. And because I was so attached to that facility, and I just felt that I was a real part of it. You know, Dr. Atkins died about 3 or 4 years after I got there. And he and I got along just fine. And I got along just fine with Dr. Ristic. And Golitis, of course, was my all-time favorite. But she was never a medical director, I don't think.
Acting. She was an actor.
For a long
Yeah.
time, I think.
She didn't want anything to do with administration. Absolutely nothing.
Did
And
you hire Bruce Potoff?
what?
Is that a loaded question?
No, no, we hope to talk to Bruce too, so we just want to make sure we had the historical records.
I'd like to be there when you talk about Bruce.
Well, there's a little matter of trying to get a straight answer, you know, out of Bruce, so as many facts as we can get ahead of time would be useful.
When I retired from Anoka, he called me on the phone. And he said, I want to wish you well and the best in your retirement. He said, I appreciate your hiring me when, of course, his wife worked for,
Rita, yes.
yeah, for me in Anoka.
Yeah. And she worked at Cambridge, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
Sure.
When I started there, I think she was there.
But, oh, Bruce, he created some problems.
He was his own man.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
I remember my fingers would always hurt when I'd see his
His little pencils.
that little signature
Oh,
that he'd sign was about this long, and you could just
yeah.
your
With a,
hands
with a
would-
pencil
yeah,
about that long,
with a
too.
pencil stub about this long.
But he was argumentative, and you just didn't want to look at him the wrong way or say the wrong thing in front of him. Although he and I got along pretty well, and his office is right across the hall from mine, but he,
Did you have periodic meetings with the other administrators, like monthly
Oh, yeah.
or quarterly or whatever? Would you and you'd what, talk about common issues and make recommendations for this,
Of course,
that, and the other thing?
DPW was always there. It wasn't Vale, it was somebody else from DPW. And of course, they always had first items on the agenda. And,
Like it should have been.
what?
Like it should have been.
Yeah. I always got along well with everybody from DPW. I don't know if you guys remember Maury Hirsch.
You know the name.
Just the name.
Yeah.
He was ahead of my time.
He was a great guy. Ovi Wangenstein.
Oh, that name too.
Yeah, those are all commissioners ahead of our time.
Ardo Roble, that's more
Ardo.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, when I started, John, you had every morning you had a meeting with administrators. I don't know if it was officially called devotions or what, but that's what the term what was the purpose of that?
I don't know if there were any night people there or not, going off duty or what, but I just felt that I wanted to get better acquainted with the staff. You know, these were top department heads, middle department heads, or whatever, and I just wanted to. And I can't remember what.
You even had new hires of any stripe come into that meeting.
I remember that.
I
I
did.
was introduced.
Yeah, I mean, I was like equivalent of an HST when I started, and I was in there with some others for one part of it, one meeting.
Well, that was one of the reasons for the meeting, to get
Any new staff introduced?
and yeah, get the middle management or management people acquainted with the new staff. I just thought it was a good idea.
So it's essentially just what's happened, what's happening today,
Yeah.
just kind of a,
Anything overnight, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
okay. It seemed like a good idea.
And you did that every morning or once a week, or how did that
No,
work?
I think
I think it was every.
Was it every morning?
Yeah, and then we backed off a little bit.
Anything you recall that we haven't asked you about that you think we should know about?
Oh, I'd have to think about that, Roger.
We'll do that. I mean, we can always come talk to you again. Once we
Yeah, I'd
do a
love to
little
have
more
you on here.
research and
Well, yeah, and
tell you, I got some scrapbooks that it's gonna take us a long time to get through. They really have some interesting.
oh, you'd enjoy seeing those, John. I mean, you had it for a long time. I mean, what? You were there 61 to 74.
Or,
I mean, to be
It's a
the
chunk of your life.
administrator that long a time was no small deal in the history of that place.
I had the longest tenure of administrators at Anoka, at Cambridge, and until Bulk came around, I had the longest tenure of any administrator at Anoka.
Is that right? I didn't know the Anoka piece. Is that? Geez.
Oh, that was wild. It and then
And in between, you were at Moose Lake for how long a period of time was that?
about 2 years,
About 2 years. Huh?
and then went back to Anoka. But Jonathan. In fact, I'm going to be seeing him tomorrow. Jonathan, in the January. Let's see. Yeah, January of '92. I don't know if I told you this or not. All of a sudden, I get a memo from, can't think of his name.
Stebner.
Yeah,
Jim Stebner.
Jim Stebner,
Assistant Commissioner.
saying that Jonathan would not be at work today. And I, no explanation. And then he had prepared a letter that he wanted me to sign to send to all, to send to all the employees, saying that Jonathan will not be there for a few. He didn't say that he was suspended or fired or whatever. And to this day, I don't know what the hell caused Stebner to do that. I thought Jonathan had a pretty good track record, and except that Myron Maleka, I don't know if you guys know Maleka, and he was taking an awful lot of time off, and Jonathan would sign the timesheet.
And other docs too. other psychiatrists too, I think.
Yeah,
What
stating
connection
that
it
they
was,
were
I'm
at
not
work,
sure.
but in fact, they were in town doing some private practice.
And that was pretty pervasive, but whether that, I mean, that was dealt with while Jonathan was still there. If there was some lingering problem with that, I don't know, but I never heard any reason either.
Do you see him up periodically, Jonathan, or
I
is
was
it?
seeing them at least once a month. We have a good old boys club group that meets every the
say-
second Wednesday of every.
And isn't Bruce Olson, does he come to those? And Chuck Lucas?
Yep. I got a call from Chuck this morning.
Who else from that bunch? Jonathan, you, Steve Thompson, does he ever come?
He used to. I haven't seen him for a while. One of the chaplains started coming, and
You go the same place every time, or move
yeah.
around?
You want to go?
No, I mean, no. I mean, I'd like to see those folks sometime, but, you know, I don't have the same connection that you guys did with it.
And I don't know most of them.
Well, you know Jonathan.
Yeah.
Isn't that enough?
Well, give him our best.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah, actually, I always got along.
He's a very
With Jonathan.
distinctive personality, wouldn't you say?
Oh yes, well said.
Yeah, he, you know, he turned off a few people.
I got along with him a lot better than I got along with Gossett. He was kind of I kind of agree with Bob Rosenthal about Gossett. He's my nemesis.
I think I got along just fine with Jonathan too, though I think about it. But then I was insulated some by you and Yvonne, hopefully.
Well, he, you know, Jonathan was a very outgoing guy.
Oh yes, yeah.
And very friendly, and except you did things the right way. If you didn't, you'd hear from him. I never had any big problem with him.
Yeah, he was intimidating. There's no doubt about that.
I remember there was some kind of a gathering not long after the new team came. I don't know, Joe G's or someplace, I can't remember where, and there was a bunch of people invited. And those people were still, I mean, they worked some hours. I, you know, at least for some of them, I'm not exactly sure what they did or what usefulness it proved to be, but for some of them, they worked at it pretty hard.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jonathan came to this gathering, 7 or 8, and he had worked, you know, up until that time. It was in the winter, I remember, and he came in as parka. So it was probably that first winter, I guess, is what happened after Dale left. They'd probably been there a little while. Enormous parka. It was just so incongruous. He'd come in with his. My memory is that was fur trimmed, but probably
I
it
think
wasn't.
that's right, though. I think
You know, the nice suit and all that, and took that off. And my wife still remembers that day. She was introduced to him, and Jonathan says something like, "Mrs. Anderson, have you ever seen my police badge?" And he had that New York Police Department that he would, you know, in his previous job out there at some psych place in one of the inner boroughs, he had been given this.
yeah.
And Karen thought,
Why would he show her
okay.
that?
And she said, well, you know, very nice, thank you. And then every now and then she'd mention Jonathan bringing it, showing her
I
his.
don't
know,
think he ever showed that around Anoka.
What a-
Well, I mean, people were, you know, having a good time. It wasn't to impress, and it was part of, in some context, I'm sure. But Karen didn't quite see the context, if I remember right. It was somebody's house where they didn't have much furniture. We were all sitting on the
I
floor.
don't think I was invited.
It wasn't a long. It wasn't a long. I mean, a late night thing. It was just like a maybe like a potluck with beer or something. I don't remember. I think it was a little. There's food and stuff, and it wasn't a late crowd. But I remember Jonathan had worked well past dark in the winter, and had just come there. And
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I think Bill came along with him, and he had been working too. So I think
Did
they
you,
worked
did you
pretty
know
hard
Larry
at it.
McHugo?
What?
Larry McHugo?
I did, but I can't,
Well, he came to Cambridge too, and he had the most rambling thoughts of anyone that I've ever known. And he would write these things, and you would read this long memo, and you would say, "What was that?"
He'd reduce him to writing.
where
Yeah.
was he from?
Faribault. He came up with Charlie.
He was an assistant administrator down there.
Yeah.
I,
He was
I
part
don't
of
know
the
if I
team.
ever met him or not.
Yeah,
He
well,
was
and he went with Charlie to the veterans home.
he was a nurse
Too.
by
Yeah,
training,
yeah.
but he worked in program areas.
But
Oh,
oh my
yeah,
God,
yeah.
he just couldn't put a thought together.
Oh,
But he was opinionated
he
too.
had some magnificent memos.
I wish we'd have saved
Oh
some
my
of those.
goodness!
Well, what do you think? Should we call her a day
Yeah, we
here?
better do that. But we'll save Jonathan. John's thoughts if he has any others for some
Yeah.
other time.
Yeah.